Hey, if you feel like you've been consuming a lot of personal development content, but you haven't really put it together into a system, I think you're going to like this video. Because the trouble with this space is definitely not a lack of information. The problem is actually operationalizing everything that you learn. That's really what a life operating system should solve. And by the end of this video, not only are you going to have a complete mental model and all the tools you need to build a LifeOS for yourself, but also we're going to actually dive deep into my Notion setup, and I'll show you exactly how everything works. By the way, if you like this video and you want to learn more, I've actually created a full 8-hour course about this system. So click the link in the description. It's completely free. But for now, let's just get into the presentation.
And here's what we're going to talk about specifically. First, we're going to cover the main goal of building LifeOS, and actually we already covered that. Then we're going to cover the core structure, and we'll talk about the only two concepts that you really need to understand to grok what I call the fundamental mastery system, or in fact, the foundation, I think, of any good LifeOS for that matter. Then we're going to cover some common problems that a proper LifeOS solves, and we're going to have a system walkthrough at the very high level so you see at least all the parts and how they interact together. And finally, we're going to cover the roadmap, so how we actually are going to learn the full system step by step. So that's really it. If you want to save some time, pro tip, you can watch it in double speed. So let's start with the core fundamental mastery system structure. And my claim is that to operationalize personal development, you only need to model two things, and that's time and progress. So really only two models. Time is kind of, you can think of it as the stage where everything happens. And progress is kind of your performance. So that's your performance on that stage. And when it comes to modeling time, what I'm saying is that everything happens in time. Really, if you think about it, your to-do list exists in time, your habits exist in time, all of your goals and projects, aspirations, and even vision, they only make sense in light of time. The best way to model time is as a nested hierarchy of cycles from today to their entire lifetime. So if we visualize that, that's how this pyramid is going to look like. At the very base, you have days, which make up the vast majority of the cycles, and then you have the cycles building up all the way to the entire lifetime. And that's your stage. That's the core structure that everything else happens inside of. And then when it comes to modeling progress, what is actually the performance? I think every cycle goes through the same stages, really. Now, no matter the time frame, the internals of the cycle have the same structure. They obviously differ, but the structure stays the same. And this is the structure. These I call the optimization stages. And it's also a cycle, so you can think of it as starting kind of at any point. But basically, you plan what you want to do, you do it, you capture all kinds of things along the way. Reset is basically you returning to the starting stance, like an athlete who just took a shot. You need to regain balance and prepare for the next play. So it's clearing the slate. Then you review how you did. And finally, before you plan your next cycle, you want to reconnect with what is it that you're trying to do at a higher time frame. And that's the dance. That's your performance on that stage of time. And the thing about this pyramid is that as you move down the cycles hierarchy, you clarify direction. In other words, your planning stages from cycle to cycle become more and more concrete as you move down. So when you reach the bottom, that's where execution happens. And also, as you capture insights at the bottom layers, you move up the hierarchy and you aggregate those insights. And aggregated insights, they help define and redefine and refine that direction. So higher cycles set the direction, lower cycles execute that direction. Lower level cycles generate insights, and then higher level cycles refine that direction based on the insights. And if you think about it, that's really the cornerstone of all personal development. And this is also an infinite cycle of self-improvement. So if you understand these two concepts, you're really going to understand the rest of the system, because everything in the system actually exists to support those cycles going through those optimization stages. So if we put everything together in one diagram, this is kind of what we end up with. We have a hierarchy of cycles. You go through optimization stages for every single cycle. And really everything else in the system just exists to support you in doing so most effectively. So for example, projects exist to support the planning stages of cycles from weeks to years. Actions exist to help you run your days and so on. So everything exists there to support you in most effectively pulling your higher level vision through the entire stack of cycles down to the moment-to-moment execution. And overall, you have just 4 primitives of life design. It's time, which is modeled with cycles. It's effort, which is modeled with projects and actions, you have knowledge, and you have domains. But really, everything revolves around cycles and the optimization stages that I talked about. So that's the core structure of the fundamental mastery system. And I think this is the core structure that you need for any LifeOS design. So if you have your own system, hopefully that's very helpful as well. Now let's mention just some of the common problems that a LifeOS should solve, a proper one. And we mentioned this one, like people collect advice endlessly. I mean, think about how much self-improvement content you're really consuming and how much, like, you hear constantly, you're like, oh, I know that, but are you actually implementing that daily? Often not, because you have nowhere to plug it in. Another problem is not staying consistent. Like, you often get very motivated for a couple of weeks and then just somehow it doesn't stick. Progress feeling invisible. So you kind of just lose steam over time. Many times when we're making progress, it seems externally, it seems like we're at a plateau. And that's okay, because that's actually how progress works. Like, we don't often have those spikes that are externally visible. So given this nature of progress, we really need to make sure that our systems visualize that progress. We have no structured cadence. So you know actually that your life happens in those specific cycles, like days and weeks and so on. But whatever system that you're using, it doesn't reflect that. There's often a disconnect between your daily goals and your long-term goals. So that's very common with people using the typical like habit trackers or to-do lists or whatever. Another problem is you putting too much on your plate. If you actually sit down and think, how many actual projects am I juggling right now? Like, very oftentimes people come up with 5 or 6 projects, but it's unconscious. It's not very intentional. So that results in burnout. A lot of people struggle to integrate good habits in their life. There are a ton of reasons for that no need to go into in this list, but LifeOS should help with that a lot. And also, a lot of people like track actually a ton of data, which I have to wonder why, because when you ask them, it turns out that basically they never review any of it. Another one relevant to burnout is keeping too much in your head. But that doesn't only have to do with like tasks and projects, but it also, like, it's information in general, or your goals, or whatever promises that you made to a person. Like, all of those things weigh you down. And in a good system, you should have a place for everything. This one, repeatedly going off the rails, I used to struggle a lot with. I would be just absolutely crushing it for just like weeks, and then inevitably something would completely throw me off, and it seemed like all of the good habits would just go out the window. And on a different note, like, even if you tried using some other systems, like, there will be a bunch of problems with that as well. Setup being overwhelming is a very common one. Like, you get basically dumped upon this huge system that you don't know how to use. Some of the functionality you wouldn't even want to use, but it would just be very difficult to kind of get rid of. Another problem is it looks cool in the first couple of weeks, but then it just collapses after usage. I think the system that you learned in this course is also very elegant and beautiful as well, but that is strictly from form following function, not because I just really wanted to make it pretty for no reason. The next is a big one, and that is the system not supporting you on what I call low days. If you take a very typical habit tracker or something, it basically treats all days as equal. But that's really not how life works. You may have work days, recovery days, even days where you may want to completely unplug from using any system. And really, your needs for all kinds of functionality in the system change over time. My point is that you should be able to use as little or as much of that functionality as needed on each of those days, and the system should work completely fine. Next one is the system feeling just pointless. And that often happens from either lack of review, which, as I mentioned before, people just don't review their stuff, and or from lack of integration of focus. So you're doing something on a daily, but you have no idea how it connects to the higher level stuff. And also, most systems just don't scale beyond days and weeks. Like, how many times you've seen, oh, this is my daily stuff and this is my weekly planning, but what happens beyond that, it's kind of left up to you. And again, if you have no system for those cycles above, that becomes a problem. On a similar note, there are problems that kind of appear at the longer term. So you may be using your days and weeks and think you're doing fine, but then when you start using it for an extended period of time, you have some other problems. Like, you don't really know what truly matters to you. So you kind of are doing some daily habits, but you kind of start questioning, like, does that really matter to me? Another problem is kind of the level of projects. You have all kind of random projects that seem to be moving you towards some directions, but you don't have a unifying strategic direction that all of them work towards. Another problem is you kind of know that you're making progress, but you can't really explain towards what. Oftentimes, you also lack a framework between competing goals. So you do have like a bunch of desires, but there's no framework in your specific system for choosing between those goals or projects or visions. And finally, there's just no overall alignment between everything. So maybe you are specifying your visions or identity or higher level focus or daily actions, but just nothing is kind of gluing everything together. So I would say if you have a well-structured LifeOS, it should solve all of these problems. So without further ado, let me just walk you through the system. In the cycles dashboard, if I hover over the sidebar, you're going to see that we have our 4 key primitives of modeling our life. We have our cycles, we have domains, effort, and knowledge. But as you know, the backbone of the entire system is the hierarchy of cycles. And this is what you can see here in the cycles dashboard. So all the current cycles from days to weeks to months to quarters and all the way to the entire lifetime, you can see it all in one place. And you can also see that every cycle has a focus. So this is your entire integration of what it is that you're working on, from seasons all the way to days. Every cycle has a focus, and then also years, quarters, months, and weeks have projects attached to them. So not only do you know your key points of focus, but also you know the projects that you're focusing on. The higher level cycles of chapters, seasons, and lifetime are slightly different in that they don't have a project that they work towards. Instead, they work towards a specific vision, but we'll talk about that a little later. And what's awesome is that every single cycle is modeled as a Notion database, a separate Notion database. So when we open them up, we can see, let's go to the week, for example. Every single cycle has a specific internal structure that drives those key optimization stages. Here's your clarity and planning, some resets, and of course, reflection and review part. And if we go to the months, you can see a similar structure. Here's how you do planning in a guided way, and here's how you do reflection. Same with quarters, same with years, and so on. Same structure. And if we look and drill down into how it is that planning happens, you can also see that every single cycle has a reconnect section, which means you reconnect with what it is that you're trying to achieve at the cycles above. So if we're looking at the week, you're going to be reconnecting with months, quarters, years, and so on. If we're looking at a month, your reconnect section would be looking at the quarter, year, and so on. If we're looking at something quite high level, like a year, your reconnect would be reconnecting with chapters, seasons, and lifetime. And then let's go back to the week. We have our routines planning. Not going to touch on that for now, but let's look at the focus setting specifically. So for cycles from weeks to years, remember that not only do we get our focus points, but also we attach a specific project that we're working towards. But depending on the time cycle, you have a different guide towards focus setting and looking at your projects. So here it is how it looks on the weekly level, and we have our project stack that we're currently working on. If we untoggle those, here we can see the entire project stack of all the projects that we're working on all the levels. So remember, think back to our entire diagram of the system. There are 4 levels of projects: strategic ones, long-term, mid-term, and short-term. So depending on the time cycle, we'd have different projects attached to them. Every project has an alignment diagram where you can immediately see what domains of life it pushes forward, what cycles it is attached to. So on a weekly level, we want to overview this entire stack, see what it is that we're working on, see what are the statuses, what's the progress of our projects, and then we can work from there. So we can see this, for example, project is attached to our parent month. So let's see what we're going to be working on in this specific week. So if we scroll down, or if we collapse this one, we're going to see this is our monthly focus. So when we're trying to set the focus for the week, we're always going to be looking at what it is that's the focus for the month. Not only the focus points, but also the project. And then we can pick a specific project to work on this week and also set the focus. And if we look up to our months or quarters or years, everything has a focus setting. There may be slight variations. So for example, on the yearly level, there's more prioritization tools that you can access for picking what's the right project to work on, but that's how the entire integration of focus happens throughout all the time cycles. So that's when it comes to the hierarchy of time cycles. And remember, we talked about the fact that direction flows from top to bottom. Now let's talk a little bit about, well, we know that insights flow from bottom to top. So let's talk about that. And you've noticed that when we looked at all these cycles, they kind of have a scorecard here on the left. And if I go back to our cycles dashboard and I scroll a little down, we have a section with all the cycles. So let me just open weeks up, and you're going to see how it looks. If I scroll, that's a scorecard for the entire week. You see we have an image that represents that week. We have a bunch of metrics. And here, this is where we have our focus. So during this week, these are our fundamental metrics, but this was the focus for the week and the project that was in focus. And here's the summary that really captures the essence of this week. And then we can really beautifully review all our weeks. And of course, our months, quarters, and years have a similar view. where at a glance we can see what this week was about, how did we do, and so on. So now let's actually examine how do we assemble this kind of view. Because right here, there are actually 5 different things that we are looking at. One thing we already know, and this is our focus setting. So let's look at the other 4 things. One thing, we have our key health metrics right here. Next, we have our subjective metrics. Third thing, we have our performance on our key routines for the fundamental domains of life. And all these scores are aggregated into the overall mastery score for the week. So those come from the execution of fundamental habits. And then finally, the 5th thing is we have a core review structure that's repeated throughout the cycles that results in a summary of the week and then a summary of the month and so on. So let's dig into the lowest time cycle, aka days, and let's see how actually everything aggregates from there. Let me open up the current day and we can dig into that. Here's the day. So first of all, the health metrics, there are certain things that you track in the morning and certain things you track in the evening. So let's start in the morning. You can easily enter your key health metrics. So they're going to be shown here. And also at the end of the day, you can enter your steps, stuff like that. So that's our key health metrics. Subjective metrics are things like our energy level. We enter that in the morning. And in the evening, we track our performance and recovery. These are simple things. It takes very little effort or time to track those. So entering your health metrics and subjective metrics should take you maybe a couple of minutes, but it's really high ROI, and those are aggregated throughout the time cycles. So we know our focus setting, we know our key health metrics, we track our subjective metrics. So now the 4th thing, let's talk about the key habits per domain of life. If we scroll down, we know that our days is actually where execution happens. Now, in the fundamental mastery system, execution happens on a daily cycle, and it happens in 2 ways. There are generic actions that you can use to track your performance and effort on all kinds of projects and all kinds of things. And I'm not going to get into the details of this execution zone, but just know that any level of tracking that you want to do, you can do within this system. But also, it's very flexible. So if you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details, you don't have to. So another way of tracking execution is through the core habits for the fundamental domains of life. So on the daily cycle, we really want to take care of our fundamental domains, such as our life admin, recovery, nutrition, clarity, and fitness. So these are the domains that are going to matter for every single human being on earth. And we break them down into specific habits that we want to check every day. We give a score for every single routine, and then checking those checkboxes, you're going to be building up a score for each domain of life. And all together, those domains are going to aggregate into the overall mastery score for the day. Those are the mastery scores that you also saw on other time cycles, and those are going to be aggregated from days into weeks, months, quarters, and years. So if we look back to our scorecards for the weeks, if we check them out, so these kind of views are actually representations of your performance on those fundamental domains. And same happens for health metrics. Those are aggregated from days all the way to years. Subjective metrics, same, and mastery by domain as well. And this is the overall mastery score for the week. So going back to the day, we saw the key health metrics, the subjective metrics, the focus setting, of course. We talked about the daily habits by fundamental domains of life. Now let's just quickly see the common review structure that you're going to see throughout the cycles. We have, at the end of the day, we have our pros, cons, and lessons. So you look at how did the day go, and this is how you review it. And what's nice is that if we go into our weeks, let's close our focus setting and go into our review. We're going to open wins, lessons, and review, and you can see the same exact structure, our pros, cons, and lessons. So when we're doing our weekly review, we see our pros, cons, lessons for each day, and we're going to write out pros, cons, and lessons for the week. And then finally, we have our summarize and celebrate, where we take those and we write out the summary, the succinct 7 to 12 bullet points that really capture the essence of the week. And then when we go to our months, quarters, or years, they all have the same structure. If we go into our wins and lessons, we have our pros, cons, lessons, and then we have our summarize and celebrate, where we finally create a summary. And those are all aggregate from days into weeks and so on. So this is really how we aggregate the insights. It happens with health metrics, it happens with subjective metrics, it happens with our core daily habits, and it happens via a unified review structure for every single cycle. And you get these wonderful scorecards. So these were our weeks. For a month, they're aggregated from weeks. And if we look into our quarters, now we can see not only the breakdown by month, but we also see a breakdown by week. So you get these heat maps of where possible issues are. And of course, your health metrics are also aggregated. And if we look into our years, not only do you see a breakdown by each quarter with average percentages and so on, you also get a breakdown by the month with this heat map review. And also you get your health metrics tracked with, by the way, getting a feedback if any of the metrics is off, because there is a way to set targets for these. So now you have a very good understanding of the system, but notice that we've mostly touched on cycles from days to years. And that's because I wanted to leave the higher level cycles for a kind of separate conversations. And this is a very interesting part of the system because this is exactly where we bridge a gap between sort of execution layer and vision layer. You notice that around the yearly time frame is kind of where we move away from having projects to having a vision. And for this higher level goal setting, we have these higher level cycles. So we have our chapters of life, which are periods of 3 to 5 years. We have our seasons of life, which are periods of 10 to 15 years. So basically, for every chapter, you have 3 to 5 years. And for every season, you have 3 to 5 chapters. And all the seasons aggregate into the highest level time cycle of the system, which is the lifetime. And if you think about it, periods of 10 to 15 years, you're really going to have only maybe 7, hopefully 8 of those in a lifetime. So that's how you complete the entire hierarchy of cycles. So reviews are going to be very similar for these cycles as they are on a lower time frame, because really, if you're overviewing your season, obviously you're going to be overviewing a collection of chapters that make it up, and you're also going to be having your pros, cons, lessons, and summaries. But planning is where it's really different. So let's just open these up and I'll quickly show you how we do planning on these higher level timeframes. So let's look at the lifetime, let's look at the season, and let's look at the chapters. I'm totally going to fly through these. Lifetime is going to be quite lightweight. Reconnect section is really going to be the self-discovery section. You can't reconnect with anything higher than lifetime, but you can definitely do some reconnection with yourself via some personality tests or reflection on your core values. And this is really what we want to get at the level of lifetime. We want to define some non-negotiables that are going to guide everything. So these would include your values and a very brief vision statement that captures the fundamentals. So moving on to the seasons, your reconnect section now is going to reconnect you to the lifetime vision, but also you're going to have another self-discovery block where you're going to learn more about yourself, what it is that you're good at, what are your current skills, and how you can possibly expand them during the next season of your life. Your vision work is going to shift here. So it's going to be really focused on the quality of life vision. People sometimes call it lifestyle-centric planning. I don't really like the term lifestyle, but quality of life is really what we're going to be focusing on. So you're going to be defining how it is that you really want to live. And only after you define that, you're going to be choosing the game that you want to play that's going to bring you closer to that quality of life vision. Finally, we have a distill section where we're going to look at the longer vision that we've crafted and distill it into the key transition points that need to happen for you to realize that vision. And that's going to be displayed here in our scorecard or in our gallery view. We're also going to define the identities. So who it is that we need to be in the pursuit of that vision. And starting from seasons, we always have a focus. So given this vision and given who it is that I want to become, what it is that I need to focus on. At the level of the season, obviously that focus is going to be very abstract, but that's completely fine because we're going to be crystallizing it and making it more practical when we go to chapters and years and so on. So moving on to chapters, we have the same reconnect, orient, and distill sections. Our reconnect is very similar, but the self-discovery is going to be more tactical. And our orient section has shifted slightly. So we already know the game that we want to be playing. So now we're going to be choosing a specific vehicle that's going to drive us towards realizing that quality of life vision. When I say vehicles, think specific roles and jobs or specific businesses that you're going to start or whatever that might be for your quality of life vision. Here, the vision at the level of the chapter, which is a period, I remind you, of 3 to 5 years, the vision is going to be slightly different. And if on the season level, we were trying to capture how it is that we want to live across all the domains of life, in our chapter, our vision is going to be more about trade-offs and is going to be more focused on the vehicle that we chose. 1 and 2 is going to be more centered around the trade-offs. So probably in the chapter of your life, you're going to be prioritizing some specific domains and deprioritizing some other domains. This is where you want to be clear about that. And we also have a distill section where we also distill the entire vision into specific bullet points. In this case, instead of identities, we distill specific skills that are going to unlock that vision. And we also have a focus. But chapters not only do that, they are a very important cycle where we actually build this bridge from vision to execution. So as the last step, we take that vision and we break it down into some core projects that we can focus on during the first year of our chapter to actually realize that vision. So once you do that brainstorming, and by the way, you get specific AI prompts in all of these exercises that are going to help you do that. Once you do that, you have that collection of projects. So when we go to our yearly level planning and into our focus setting, you're already going to have a bunch of ideas for the core strategic projects that you can work on. And then you have a bunch of tools for prioritizing and picking which one should be the first domino that you work on. That was a super quick look, but this is really, if I had only a very limited amount of time, this is how I would describe the system. And I really hope you see not only how simple it is at the core level, but also how powerful it is when you see how everything is integrated. Obviously, I haven't talked about everything and I haven't touched on some specific areas of the system, but I really wanted you to see the most fundamental things, and hopefully you can see how you can start using this system. I also want you to see how little time it actually takes to run such a system. The beautiful thing is that the entire thing is already built out for you, and there are specific guidelines for how you can adjust it to your specific needs. Once you do that, your data entry takes very little time, and reviews of the week, reviews of the quarter, they are actually much easier once you have all the data being aggregated for you. So it takes very little time to maintain the system. And I hope you see that the ROI on your time would be just immense. Okay, so that was the demo, and that's really just scratching the surface, of course, but hopefully now you kind of see how it looks like when your life is fully integrated, where basically nothing is disconnected from each other, and every action that you take is aligned with that higher level direction, and then your higher level direction, of course, is continuously refined by feedback. And one important thing to note here is that what's amazing is also the flexibility of the entire system. So like I have people who love its habit tracking, but they don't really use projects, or people who swear by projects, but don't use any specific actions planning, right? But other folks love planning their entire week like in 30-minute blocks, but don't really focus on higher level planning. Or at the same time, some people may just totally don't use the daily cycle, but they build their cycles hierarchy from like weeks and up. So I've basically tried creating this system so that you can use each separate part and it's totally worth the entire template. So kind of just, I wanted to know that you can treat it as a menu and pick what works for you, right? And if you like multiple bits of it, that's of course awesome. Let's look at the roadmap. So introduction, you're almost done with this module, and hopefully by now you already have a complete mental model for building a life operating system. Next module is going to be our fundamentals. We'll learn the core structure of all of the cycles. This is going to be extremely high ROI because you're going to learn it once, and then it's going to apply to your days, your weeks, your months, your quarters, your years, and so on. So at this point, we'll be applying this structure to the daily cycle, but the rest of the cycles will basically instantly make sense to you. And that's where we also will go through the initial template installation, the setup. And what's nice is that you're going to be able to start using the system right after this module without needing to set up your whole life first. And it will actually be immediately practical and useful. Then we're going to move to domains, which are your areas of life. So most of the times people use kind of like a flat list of rigid life areas, but we're going to use something much more powerful than that. And it's going to be super simple because you're going to get a setup that fits most of the people, and you'll be able to adjust it to your own life in probably about 5 to 10 minutes. And at the same time, this is the module where we're going to go through a specific sequence of life optimization, what I call the hierarchy of life mastery. So this is going to be a very simple module, but at the same time, all the later modules like habits, projects, actions, and higher level planning, they all link to domains. So this is important that we cover it early on. The next few modules are really going to be about learning all the execution related tools in the fundamental mastery system. So we're going to start with habits. And at that point, you're going to be clear on how to break down your life into specific domains. And now we're going to be able to leverage that to create specific habits to push those domains forward on a daily basis. You'll be able to easily configure your habits for each domain because you'll also get like a whole menu of daily habits to choose from. So making it your own would just take some minutes. And the rest is going to be kind of magical because all the scoring, the performance visualization by domain, aggregation of those domains into the overall score of the cycle, and the aggregation of those domains into the overall daily score, and the aggregation of those daily scores into weeks and months and quarters and all the way up to years will be just happening automatically. That's already all configured for you. Then we're going to switch to projects. Now, projects are really going to be at the center of the effort pyramid. They will be bridging the gap between our higher level vision and the execution pipelines. So they're going to be the main planning tool for cycles from weeks to years. And I'll show you the hierarchy of projects, how we break down complex initiatives into more manageable chunks, and how the entire life cycle of projects is actually managed via the cycles pages. So you don't really have to go to a separate projects dashboard to open or close them. Then we switch to actions. Now, actions are going to be the final puzzle piece in the effort hierarchy. We'll also cover a bunch of unique tools to help you plan and execute excellent days consistency. Basically, at this point, you'll have your what I call masterpiece days kind of down to a science. You'll be able to repeat them over and over again. And at this point, you're going to have all the core pieces in place. So now we're going to be introducing those binding structures that are going to pull everything together. So you can think of those cycles as kind of like integration hubs of the entire system. And we'll start with the big one, which is weeks. And now you're going to start understanding why your typical Notion Live dashboards make really no sense, because they don't consider the time frame that you're looking at. You, on the other hand, are going to be really getting a separate dashboard for each of the cycles. You're going to see how easy it is to run your planning, your tracking, your review once you're clearly guided through the process and you have all the relevant data right in place. Then we're going to switch to months. Months are going to be intentionally lightweight, so it's just going to be a breeze. And also, since you already know the core structure, it's just going to instantly make sense. And when it comes to quarters and years, it's also going to have the same internal structure. We'll just add more prioritization tools, because at that level, strategy becomes to matter more. And also at the quarterly level, our reset routines will go deeper and they will build on top of the weekly ones. Then just for a moment, we'll switch gears from talking about cycles and we'll introduce knowledge management as a universal information storage layer. So anything that can't be captured by actions or projects or cycles is going to go there. And it just absolutely amazes me how people make this module the most important piece of their life operating system. And everyone's into their second brains and stuff like that. But in reality, this should be the smallest part of the complete system. But I digress. Nonetheless, we're going to see how we can organize all of our information, make it easy to capture and easy to find later on. Then we're going to get to the basically final stretch of the system. We're finally going to talk about the higher level cycles, and that's moving beyond years. As we move beyond years, we're going to add chapters, seasons, and lifetime as our cycles. And what's nice is that it's not going to be anything vague. You're going to see that vision is simply higher level planning. And this planning is, of course, also done in cycles. And there is a specific sequence to it, as opposed to the typical, hey, sit down and write a vision for your life kind of exercise. I'll first show you why we didn't start with the vision, as most other systems recommend. And I also hope that you're going to appreciate that we're going to take a very practical and systematic approach to this higher level planning. So vision module is going to be the introduction to the rest of the course. And then we're going to start introducing those higher level cycles, starting with the lifetime cycle, where we're going to focus on basically changing truths about your core personality traits and your values. The vision work is going to be very limited here. It's going to really consist of defining what I call your core standards. That's going to reference your most important values. We're going to introduce seasons after that, which are periods of 10 to 15 years, and we'll get very clear on your strengths and weaknesses. We want to work with ourselves, not against ourselves. After that, we'll define our quality of life and get very clear on actually how it is that we really want to live. And this exercise is going to be very guided and also much more helpful than your typical vision with mansions and freaking Lamborghinis. And once we're clear on how we want to live, we'll then broadly explore the opportunity landscape and then systematically filter all the options to get clear on the game that we want to be playing. And the last module is going to be about chapters, which are chunks of 3 to 5 years. And at this point, you'll have massive clarity from all the previous exercises. Chapters are going to be about deciding on the next move within the game that you've already chosen. Think of it as choosing a specific vehicle that's going to be taking you to your quality of life vision destination. And once you've selected your vehicle, we're going to craft what I call a tactical vision. That vision is going to be oriented around your vehicle that you've chosen and around the trade-offs that you're going to make specifically in this chapter, because you can't really be pushing every domain of your life forward at once. And what's nice is once you have that tactical vision defined, it's going to be very easy for you to bridge the gap from the vision layer of the system to the execution layer of the system. That tactical vision will easily map on to the strategic projects. And that's the entire plan. That's the sequence. And that's basically all, folks. And if you implement all of this, I can guarantee you each day you'll know exactly what to do. You'll never have to wonder if you're on track or not. What you're going to work on are the things that matter absolutely most to you. And not only are you going to be on track, but you're also going to have a system that's going to keep you on track. So if this makes sense to you, I have one big ask. I would just encourage you to stop consuming personal development content for a while and just focus on this. Just focus on building the system, because you don't need more information right now. You need to actually implement this system. And this is going to be enough, I promise.
Also, if you're interested, as I mentioned, there's a link in the description with an 8-hour course about the entire thing. And you're going to learn a ton, and you're going to be able to apply it to your own setup if you want to build it yourself, Or in case you're interested, there's also going to be a link available to the template that I'm using. I've spent hundreds of hours building that template, so if you want to save yourself some time, then you can also access that. But I wish you the best and see you soon.